My parents kicked me out at 16 so my older sister could move back home with her boyfriend. It was always obvious that my parents never loved me, but it wasn't until last week, when I turned 16, that I got irrefutable proof. It started out the usual, zero celebration, zero cake, but then they actually surprised me with a gift. Only it wasn't for me, it was for them. They kicked me out of the house. The reason? My older sister, Natalie. She's their golden child, and always has been. They've never explained why, but I'm socially awkward, and I've never had a girlfriend. Meanwhile, she was the most popular girl in high school, and now she's 8 months pregnant. And on the morning of my birthday, my parents woke me up and told me to start packing. You see, we have 4 bedrooms, and they needed one for the new baby, one for my sister, and one for her boyfriend. At my expense, of course. So they were throwing me out to my uncle. I didn't even react. And after a few minutes of silence, they promised to cover all my expenses until I turned 18 if I was no longer under their roof. Natalie wasn't even home during this conversation, and I immediately knew that this was intentional, so that she wouldn't have to witness this disaster and feel guilty. I thought we had a normal relationship, but in that moment, I realized that my family never really cared about me. And she was no exception. And like any 16-year-old who gets told they're getting kicked out on their birthday, I was crushed. But I knew nothing I could say would make them truly love me. And so I spent my 16th birthday stuffing all my stuff into trash bags. They helped me pack, but honestly, I think they just made it easier for me to leave. When it was over, they even drove me to my uncle's place and chatted happily the whole way. At one point, my mom turned to my dad with a huge smile on her face. "Hey, now that OP's gone, we can finally order Indian food." When we arrived, I expected a goodbye hug, or at least a good luck wish. But instead, they pulled over to the side of the road and drove away before I even made it to the front door. And when my uncle opened the door, I felt even worse because he hugged me and greeted me warmly. I burst into tears, because all this made me realize how horrible my parents really are. Eventually, I shared everything with him, and he looked completely shocked by what I said, and asked me to repeat everything. So, I recounted the events of the morning, and his friendly smile instantly changed into an angry grin. Without saying anything, he grabbed the phone, said that he needed to make a call, and disappeared into another room. Suddenly, my uncle's voice came through the walls. This was completely out of character for him, as he rarely raises his voice at anyone. He is usually very calm and quiet. I immediately realized that someone had seriously pissed him off for him to react so strongly. When he came back, his face was bright red with anger, and I discovered that my parents were the source of his rage. It turns out that my father, his brother, had told him that I had suggested the arrangement, and that I had no objection whatsoever to moving out of my childhood home and into his. That explained why my uncle had agreed to take me in, because he thought it was my idea. After that call, he handed me a pint of Ben & Jerry's ice cream. He said he wished he had done this sooner. He said, "Be careful what you post online." Because it had gone viral, but with the wrong people. A bunch of relatives had seen it, and my inbox was flooded with messages from my parents and even my sister. Meanwhile, numerous family members had commented, expressing their support. A few people wrote, offering to help if I needed anything. This was nice, until I read the messages from my parents, which were full of rage and hostility. They were obviously furious about what I had said and demanded that I delete the post immediately. My dad said some horrible things, even writing that he wished I had never been born. Painful, but not surprising. My mom's messages were just as nasty, but my sister was different. She didn't say much other than asking to speak to me in person if possible. I was completely overwhelmed by all the responses and simply put the phone down again, ignoring everyone for the next couple of days. I did, however, block my parents, as I had no desire to communicate with them anymore. I knew they were legally obligated to support me financially until I came of age. And beyond that, I saw no reason to maintain contact. And then my uncle finally woke up from his afternoon nap. He walked quickly into the living room where I'd been sitting since arriving and calmly asked if I'd posted anything online. After showing him everything, he seemed to approve of this approach. And if my father tried to contact him in the days that followed, he never told me because we continued to live as if nothing had happened, which confirmed his complete support for my actions. That was all the validation I needed or wanted. I had virtually no contact with my parents for about a week. But then they suddenly showed up outside my school as I was leaving, looking absolutely furious. My friends were fully aware of the situation, so they formed a protective barrier around me so I wouldn't have to communicate if I didn't want to. But they kept shouting my name until I finally responded. I firmly walked up to them and told them I didn't want anything to do with them anymore. But they completely ignored me and insisted that I come home with them immediately. I couldn't understand why they suddenly wanted me back when they had made it clear that they didn't care about me at all. It seemed like a desperate attempt to save their reputation with their relatives, so I refused to go anywhere until they explained what was going on, trying to understand this sudden change in attitude. They seemed both furious and determined to get me home. When they said they didn't want my friends listening, I told my friends to step aside so we could talk in private. Once my friends were out of earshot, they confessed that they needed me because I wasn't answering their calls or texts, and they had to make peace with me to secure their inheritance. After my post went viral in our family, my grandparents found out. My dad's parents were very wealthy, and they threatened him that continuing to treat me like that would cost him his inheritance. They said that if my parents didn't make peace with me, treat me better, and make sure I felt loved and cared for, then everything my father was supposed to inherit would go to my uncle, since he had taken care of me without obligation. My father couldn't afford to lose that inheritance. We're talking serious money here. My parents earned a decent combined income on their own, but honestly, if I were them, I'd probably want that inheritance too. The difference is that I would have been smart enough not to make it seem like they were doing me a favor by taking me back. Because it wasn't about me at all, it was about their own financial interests. Even then, they lacked the basic intelligence to even pretend that they genuinely wanted me home. So I told them I didn't care about their inheritance and walked away without listening to another word, ignoring their screams as I left. I took the bus back to my uncle's and described the confrontation at school, which also angered him. To prevent future incidents, he contacted his lawyer about changing my custody arrangement. Legally, my parents still had rights to me, and that had to be changed if I was going to live with my uncle permanently. I also called my grandparents to thank them for their intervention, but explained that I genuinely didn't want to go back to my parents because after just a few days with my uncle, I finally felt free for the first time. Life with my parents was stifling, and despite constant hopes for improvement, nothing changed. My grandparents live in another state, so we rarely see each other. But during family gatherings and holidays, my parents were perfect, so my grandparents never saw how I was treated at home. It wasn't outright cruelty, but constant indifference and neglect. On the surface, everything seemed fine, but anyone who spent a few days with me would notice how they literally ignored my existence, focusing entirely on my sister. After she became pregnant, things took a turn for the worse, and I became completely invisible. I explained all of this to my grandparents, who assured me that if I wanted to live with my uncle, they would make it possible. If my parents signed away their rights, my grandparents would take care of my needs. I felt optimistic after this conversation because things were finally looking up. But it was short-lived when I received an email from my father a few hours later. It wasn't mean or cruel, just frustratingly manipulative. He argued that I shouldn't have posted about the situation online when my grandparents would have found out about it through my uncle anyway. Now, on top of my grandparents' wrath, they were facing a huge backlash from relatives and social isolation, which he felt was unfair. He mentioned that some coworkers had discovered the post because it had appeared in their feeds when he was tagged. This had caused problems at his workplace, and he said my actions had caused unnecessary drama in their lives. So, I posted about how my parents kicked me out at 16 to give my room to my pregnant sister's baby. Update 1. Before I share what happened next, thank you to everyone who took the time to comment on my post. Your encouraging words mean everything to me right now. In answer to questions about why I didn't leave sooner and wait to be kicked out, especially since my grandparents and uncle were willing to help. The truth is that I wasn't outright abused. As I mentioned, I wasn't actively abused, I was just constantly ignored and treated as unwanted. That's definitely a form of abuse. But in my mind, I was grateful that I wasn't being physically hurt or verbally attacked. I had shelter and food, so I convinced myself that I was okay and didn't need to feel loved or valued. I had normalized the neglect so much that I didn't even recognize it as abnormal. As for why I never asked for help from distant relatives, I honestly didn't want to burden anyone. I was constantly worried about what would happen if they said no, and my parents found out I asked. It would have made my situation at home much worse since my parents are obsessed with appearances. That's why I kept it all to myself and suffered in silence. My uncle never offered to take me in because he didn't want to hurt my parents' feelings. Plus, he wasn't sure I'd even want to live with him. So even though it didn't happen sooner, the way things unfolded organically probably worked out better in the end. It happened late, but hey, better late than never, right? He is currently working with a lawyer to transfer custody of the child to him, which will be a huge battle since there is now inherited money involved. But even if it goes to court, my grandparents and uncle have promised to support me fully. My uncle has been very apologetic since I arrived, because he finally realized how neglected I was at home, and feels terrible that he never looked into it because he thought it was none of his business. At least now that everything is out in the open with my family, I feel more hopeful about my future. Now about my sister Natalie. In my original post, I mentioned that she had texted me asking to meet in person, but I ignored her message because I didn't know how to respond. She had never been directly mean to me. She had simply adopted our parents' distant behavior. She had been distant her entire life, but on the rare occasions we had interacted, she had been generally pleasant. I assumed that the whole plan to kick me out for her boyfriend and baby had been her idea, which I felt like she had finally shown her true colors by actively hurting me. So I ignored her message entirely. Our relationship had always been awkward and tense, but I still preferred her to our parents, because at least she was decent when we actually talked. It wasn't her fault that our parents were so obviously favoring her. So, 3 days ago, when she wrote again asking to visit her, I decided to call and ask why she wanted to see me. I refused to go back to my parents' house where I assumed she would be, but to my surprise, she told me that she was staying at her boyfriend's apartment. She wasn't feeling well enough to go out because of her pregnancy, so she asked if I would come over to discuss everything that was going on with our family. She mentioned that she had something to tell me in person. Out of pure curiosity, I decided to visit her. When I arrived, she immediately apologized for never defending me, even though she clearly knew that our parents favored her and constantly ignored me. They constantly ignored my accomplishments while celebrating hers, and I was clearly an unwanted child, but she never tried to fix it. She admitted that she was too uncomfortable with the conflict with our parents, so she let it continue. Since I seemed to be okay with this treatment, she felt less responsible to speak up. Now she realized how terrible the whole situation was, and genuinely wanted to make things right. She also revealed that our parents never discussed the living arrangements with her at all. She was completely stunned to learn that they kicked me out to accommodate her child and boyfriend, claiming that she had no idea this had happened. She had never asked for such arrangements. Her real plan was to stay with our parents only until the baby was a couple of months old before moving in with her boyfriend. She wanted to move sooner, but only stayed because our parents begged her. However, after reading my post, she realized she couldn't continue to condone their behavior and moved out within a week. This caused a huge fight with our parents, who insisted she was making a terrible decision. They are currently not even on speaking terms, as they accused her of being ungrateful and selfish. None of this is true, as she never promised them anything. They were just making assumptions. We cleared the air completely, and she promised the same thing my uncle had, that from now on she would always support me no matter what. It's been a little less than a week since my initial post, and I haven't heard from my parents since that email, so I'm guessing they finally stopped trying to get me back. I'm pretty sure my grandparents intervened because they called midweek to reassure me that my parents wouldn't be bothering me at school or sending me any more emails. I didn't even mention my dad's email to them, so there must have been some behind-the-scenes conversations between my parents and grandparents. I don't know exactly what was discussed, but it seems my parents have finally accepted defeat. Update 2. It's only been 3 days since my last update, and today, my uncle announced that my parents have agreed to sign away their parental rights. The paperwork should be finalized soon, and he will officially take legal custody. I have very mixed feelings right now. On the one hand, I'm thrilled to finally have a home where I don't constantly feel unwanted and unimportant. But on the other hand, I feel strangely empty and melancholy about certain aspects. It's surreal that this is actually happening, but it's ultimately the right way to go. It's exactly what I needed. Update 3. Hey everyone, it's been a couple weeks since my uncle officially became my legal guardian. Big win! I also discovered that my parents only gave up guardianship because after I told my grandparents that I refused to come home, they gave my parents an ultimatum: either lose the entire inheritance or get 50% of what they were originally supposed to get, but give up guardianship and promise to never contact me again without my permission. Guess which option my parents chose? LMAO. Not surprised at all. And honestly, I don't care, because it just confirms that I dodged a huge bullet. Got rid of it, and thank God. I still talk to my sister regularly. My parents are desperately trying to make peace with her before her due date, but she demands her space right now and has told them to stop bothering her daily. At this point, I can't help but laugh at the complete chaos they've created for our family. But come what may, I'm happy living with my uncle. I focused on school, too, getting straight A's my senior year. When the college acceptance letters started coming in, my parents were genuinely happy for me. They even threw me a little party when I got into my first choice, to 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 my first choice.